All right, so we are coming to you with another important conversation about what's happening in Armenia and Artsakh, as well as some of the political issues here in the United States. I'm Glendale City Council member Artie Kasakian, and I'm very honored to have as our guest today someone I've known for almost going on 2 decades now, Congressman Frank Pallone Jr. from New Jersey. Democrat representing the 6th Congressional District of New Jersey, a very influential and important congressional delegation in our House of Representatives. And Congressman Pallone has been serving in the House since 1988. He actually represents New Brunswick, Sayreville, an area I lived in with my family when I was a young child after I was born in Boston. My dad worked for Hess. And, I had the opportunity when I was a student at UCLA to actually intern for the member of Congress, for Congressman Pallone. And what was so special about it at the time was when I was at UCLA and I was learning about Armenian history and learning about more about the culture and the politics of the region. Congressman Frank Pallone was the co-founder, one of the founders, actually the founder of the Armenian Issues Caucus, which quickly became one of the largest caucuses by membership. One of the most influential ones, and under his leadership, we saw Armenia and Artsakh receive a significant amount of aid. And obviously, we've had a conversation about what's been happening in Armenia, but I want to ask the congressman to convey some of his thoughts about what's happened there. Congressman, thank you for joining me, and I hope all is well with you. Especially as our country is going through the transition of leadership. We just heard the good news that things can move forward with the presidential transition. But I know that through our conversations, Armenia and Artsakh and what's been happening there has been weighing heavily on you. Has anyone been to Armenia from our members of Congress in Washington? Has anyone been to Armenia and to Artsakh more times than you have?
No, I don't think so. Not.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And when was the last time that you were there?
I think we were there not last October, but the October before was the last time. After the Velvet Revolution, Artie, the new government under Pallone, under Prime Minister Pallone, and his party, members of parliament, were very young, still are very young members, and they really were determined to, I would say, upgrade the parliament, make it more important within the Armenian democratic system. And so they reached out to us, and we had several visits. We went there twice in the last few years. They came. There's a group. We have, of course, here in the U.S., the Armenian Issues Caucus, and they have what they call a US Armenia friendship group within the parliament. And it wasn't just the party of Pallone, it was also, others that came. And so we created this, I guess, parliamentary exchange is the best way to put it, where we would try to go back and forth. And over a 2-year period, we went twice, they came here once. And, of course, we were trying to play up the fact that Armenia was a true democracy now, and that the parliament was an important branch, the legislature was an important branch of that democratic process. And that continues. I mean, it continued right up until this war broke out, with the Azeri and Turkish aggression, and it still continues. Of course, now, it's difficult because of the war, but, we do intend to continue that.
So, your career in Congress has spanned many decades, but most importantly, from, I guess, the nascent days of when Armenia first became independent to today, as well as Artsakh. Now, what have been your personal impressions of the democratic and economic developments, specifically in Artsakh over the decades?
Well, I mean, Artsakh from day one, after the Soviet Union broke up, was a very democratic society. I mean, I actually went and witnessed one of the elections, one of the presidential elections, I'll say 10 years ago, but maybe it was more. And I mean, it really, Artsakh was and continues to be a true democracy in the sense that, the elections were always very transparent. Um, it reminded you, if you went there during an election, and I went during one of the presidential elections, it reminded you very much of the United States. I remember one time I actually went and I saw where they were doing, some people that were older were voting by absentee ballot. And it was funny because it was, it wasn't a mail-in ballot, which is so much the case now, but it was in a little village outside of Stepanakert, and they had like a little sort of looked like a mailbox where people could, vote by mail, so to speak. But you brought it there and dropped it in. You didn't mail it. So I always was impressed, and still am, with the democratic process in Artsakh, and of course, in the advent of the Velvet Revolution, I don't think there's any question that Armenia is a true democracy, very much on the Western model as well. But that took a while. It was always true in Artsakh.
Yeah, and I mean, in comparison to some of the other states in the region, most notably in Azerbaijan, I mean, it's really not the case. The Freedom
Oh, if I
Index
think
ranking
so
of
many,
Azerbaijan is very
no, Artie,
low.
so many of the former Soviet republics have moved further and further away from democracy, whether it's Azerbaijan or it's Russia itself, or it's, some of them, you talk a place like Belarus, we might as well have been during the Soviet era, not only do they have not only is it an absolute dictatorship, but it even has a lot of the, communist models of collective farms and everything that still exist. So, Armenia, I think today is one of the most democratic of the former Soviet republics. The only others would be comparable would be maybe the Baltic states, would be similar. Other than that, many of the former Soviet republics have become more and more totalitarian, including Russia itself, of course.
I know the events of the last 2 months have weighed very heavily on you, especially knowing some of the people have been directly impacted by this. We spoke a little bit about this and shared some of our concerns and for lack of another description, our sorrow over the humanitarian crisis and the devastation that's occurring. But you also are in a position to take action, and you brought about a resolution in Congress to support Artsakh's self-determination. Can you please share a little bit about that and where that issue stands, and what is it going to take for us to have the United States recognize Artsakh?
Well, Artie, the issue of Artsakh's status has always weighed heavily on my mind and on the Armenian caucus. And, whether it's myself or Adam Schiff or Jackie Spear, I mentioned some of our co-chairs who all, both happen to be from California. We felt very strongly that if there wasn't recognition of Artsakh's status, certainly either as an independent country or at least as an Armenian, state for purposes of self-determination, that it would be more difficult for it to assert itself, certainly in the international sphere, but also would make it more vulnerable that if there was a military attack like what occurred a month ago, that, Turkey and Azerbaijan would say, we have the right to go in there and conquer the area because it's not its own state. It has no status. Now, you and I know that none of that is true. I know, some people say, why are you talking about the Soviet Constitution? But the Soviet Constitution said that not only republics like Armenia and Azerbaijan, but also oblasts, in other words, these semi-autonomous regions, had a independent status, and when the Soviet Union broke up, under the Soviet Constitution, had the right to have a referendum and declare themselves independent states. And that's exactly what Artsakh, or Nagorno-Karabakh, then did. They had a referendum, they declared themselves an independent state, and they had the right to become a state, totally as a nation. But that a lot of that has been forgotten. And part of the problem is that not only Azerbaijan, but even Russia itself, even though I'm citing you the Soviet Constitution, in practical terms, denies that, or at least, uses it when they want to and doesn't when they don't. So, for example, when Chechnya tried to assert its independent status from the Russian Federation, Putin came in and just totally suppressed it militarily. And he has done the same thing with, well, I shouldn't say the same thing, but, it depends. Like in the case of Georgia, the autonomous regions, he recognizes as autonomous region. In the case of Chechnya, he doesn't. And in the case of Artsakh, it's, it's sort of in between, right? Okay, we recognize that it's an Armenian, region of some sort, but we're not going to recognize it as an independent state. And whether it was before this war or after this war, it is very important for us to continue to assert the status issue. Aliyev and Erdogan, before the war and now, say, well, Artsakh has no status. Well, that's simply not true. It does, and it has an international status. I mean, it had a status where it could be an independent state under the Soviet Constitution. And I'm sorry, maybe people don't want to hear about the Soviet Constitution. It was the Soviet Union, but that was the organic law from which the Soviet Union began and from which it was dissolved, okay? So again, I mean, I could talk all night about this, as you can imagine, but I do want to make that point.
So tell me about your resolution. What would your resolution?
Our resolution says that it should be, first of all, recognizes the right of self. Azerbaijan says the only thing that matters is territorial integrity. Self-determination doesn't mean anything, right? But under international law, self-determination is a principle of international law, as is territorial integrity. But, so what we're basically saying is that Artsakh should be recognized as an independent state. But even absent that, we have to assert the status of self-determination. The Armenian people of Artsakh have a right to have a referendum and determine their status. And that has not changed. The war does not change that.
I always tell folks that, Artsakh is as much a part of Azerbaijan as America is still a part of Great Britain. We fought a war of independence against a government that saw us as a part of their, an extension of their empire. And Americans here have this legacy of, we fought for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it's truly no different than what the people of Artsakh have been fighting for decades, actually predating the collapse of the Soviet Union. They wanted to have the right to determine their own future. And I can't think of a more American principle than that. So where does it stand right now? What can, I guess, the extension of my question would be, what can we as diasporan Americans of Armenian descent do to make sure that our Congress and our other branches of government follow through on what you've proposed and recognize Artsakh? Because I think if America did so, it would be a major step forward and would send a very clear message as to where we stand in terms of our values on the issues that you raised.
Well, look, with regard to the diaspora, and Artie, because you know me well, and we've known each other for years, being that I am not Armenian, I don't want to dictate what Armenian diaspora should do, right? Like, who am I to tell you what to do, okay? But I do think that the most important thing right now is unity, right? We cannot get depressed. I mean, there are many nights and when I've been crying and couldn't sleep since the war. And, not only during the war, but after this agreement, which is certainly not something that is acceptable. I mean, we have to live with it now, but it's not good for Armenia. But I don't think the government had any choice, I have to be honest. And so, I think the most important thing is unity, right? We have this democracy. We have this country of Armenia. We have this other country, which is Artsakh, right? Let's stay united. I'm not saying there shouldn't be criticism. Democracy is all about debate and criticism. But keep in mind that there has to be a level of unity that, that we support the Armenia, that we want Artsakh to continue to be Armenian. So I think the most important thing is be unified, and to the extent that we can, and then have the diaspora as well as the US government insist that the people that were forced out of Artsakh by Turkey and Azerbaijan be allowed to go back, and that the conditions be made so that they would want to go back, right? Because think about, and that we provide the humanitarian assistance to rebuild. And Artie, I know that's very difficult. You know, how many times have I been to Shushi and seen the money that was spent to build the cathedral, right? Which is now under Azeri control. How many times did we go on Thanksgiving telethons, which is, you know, the day after tomorrow, and make a pitch to build the road that, through the Lachin corridor or the north-south road in Artsakh. And I think a lot of people in the diaspora right now are saying, oh my God, you know, that money was wasted. The Azerbaijan now controls a good part of this, but we can't give up. The diaspora has to be supportive, provide humanitarian assistance, insist that the US government provide major humanitarian assistance, and rebuild and make Artsakh strong again. The security situation is a problem, right? Because now with Azerbaijan controlling the areas around Artsakh and only access being through the Lachin corridor, I think a lot of people who are going to say, well, how can I go back? I'm concerned about my security. I'm going to be hit by a missile, or whatever. I mean, I'm being very dramatic here, but it's very important that people go back and that they have a sense that we want them to go back and that Artsakh remains Armenian. That's the most important thing. The status issue is certainly something that we have to take up. And so what we've been doing within the Armenian caucus is basically saying, for this administration and the Trump administration in the last few days, trying to get Pompeo and the Minsk group to reactivate the fact that rather than, this is not just a Russian sphere of influence here, right? We want to be the Minsk group, the United States, France, Minsk group. We want to be involved in this process, and we want to assert the status of Artsakh and its right to self-determination. And we will certainly do that, and the diaspora can be supportive of that, and I want them to be. But I think from the diaspora's point of view, the most important thing, stay united, that, supportive of Armenia, supportive of the democratic process, supportive of Artsakh, and whatever you can financially and otherwise to rebuild. It's very important to rebuild, as much as that's going to be difficult. And it will be difficult. I'm not suggesting it won't be.
We are finding ourselves in a moment where you find Armenians uniquely united, particularly here in the United States. I think that there is, whatever the opinions may be about the politics within Armenia, I think that everyone feels that we as Americans can be doing more, including ourselves. When I say Americans, I mean all of us, Armenians, everyone, to be supporting Armenia and Artsakh and trying to raise the levels. For instance, when you were first in office, Armenia had one of the highest levels of aid per capita in terms of foreign aid received from the United States, in no small part to your efforts. And by the way, I should mention that the caucus that you speak of is a bipartisan caucus. I know we mentioned only some of the Democratic leaders, but I believe Gus Bilirakis is also one of the co-chairs, is he not?
Gus Bilirakis, yeah, and now, I mean, I didn't want him to win because, but I guess has Valdeo been declared the?
You know what? I'm not sure, but I know that then former Congressman and maybe perhaps Congressman re-elect Valdeo did a tremendous amount of work on the demining issue with the Halo Trust.
I still hope that TJ Cox wins that race, but if he does come back, he's been, he was a Republican that was involved in a lot of these.
Both individuals have been very supportive of the issue, which is, we're fortunate for that. And so this is a bipartisan issue, right? It is something that it doesn't have a Republican or a Democratic side to it. I remember when you started the caucus, I think it was with Nolenberg was the other co-chair.
Oh, Nolenberg. And then the other guy that was from Illinois who retired, he came with us a couple of times. What was his name?
Mark.
From Illinois. From Michigan. He took. Well,
that was Nolenberg, was it not? I think it was Nolenberg.
He took Nolenberg's seat. He was there for a while. No, there have been definitely Republicans that have been very helpful. Yes.
So what can we do to make sure that the levels of aid that are allocated, because we saw a decline of that aid. I think after 9/11, there was a little bit of a dip, and then there was a Millennium Fund. But we've seen a steady decline. And I think Armenia really now, and Artsakh needs US assistance more than ever, especially when you look at the photos of what happened in Stepanakert and in other civilian areas with the cluster bombs and the rocket attacks. There's going to be a lot of work to rebuild. And like you said, also to give the people the confidence to come back and return to their indigenous lands, to their homes, to their villages. What can we do to help facilitate that effort?
Well, I mean, certainly we're going to try to have a large humanitarian aid package. I mean, last week, the State Department announced that they were sending, I think, $5 million initially, which I'm glad they're doing it, but that's, not much. And we're going to try to get a much larger aid package passed. I will tell you, though, that at least, again, I'm not there. I wish I could go, but I mean, I don't think we're going to be going for a while, but as soon as I can, I will. And I'm talking about with COVID and everything, it's hard to go. But the situation on the ground in Stepanakert, in terms of people being able to eat and live, from what I understand, is not bad, right? In other words, it's not like people are starving or anything. But I think there's going to be a lot of help that's going to be needed for all the housing that was destroyed, all the roads that were destroyed, all of that. And that's going to take a lot of money. And look, let's face it, Artie, we're going to try to get as much as we can from the US government, but it pales by comparison to what the diaspora contributed, not only the American diaspora, but the French, the Russian, Armenian diaspora. I mean, that's going to be a lot ultimately more important than what aid we give, although we're going to try to get as robust a package as possible.
Yeah. And in addition to that aid, one of the things that I think is on the minds of a lot of people, especially the last few days, as more video footage and photographs are surfacing of at least those recorded instances of war crimes, especially by Azeri sources and possibly some Turkish special forces against Armenians, against Armenian civilians and POWs. Are we going to take concrete steps to sanction Azerbaijan and sanction Turkey? I mean, how can we tolerate any developed country or so-called developed country in this day and age to commit the types of crimes that they're committing? I mean, beheading civilians and beheading soldiers under any circumstances is unconscionable and should not be tolerated. At least, as I setting aside my Armenianness for a moment, as an American, I'm appalled that our country is spending tax dollars supporting any of these regimes.
Artie, you're absolutely right, and I don't mean to take away from that. Look, what happened in Artsakh is emblematic of what could happen elsewhere, right? And has happened elsewhere. I mean, essentially, what you had here was what has happened is that Turkey under Erdogan has not only become a dictatorship, because at one time Turkey was, fairly democratic, right? Not a perfect democracy, but now it's like a dictatorship, right? And what he has done is essentially establish this mercenary force of of terrorists, if you will, that are coming from Syria mostly, but all kinds of other places. Force of maybe 10,000 that's armed with the latest, military technology, drones or whatever it is, that can be sent at a moment's notice anywhere in the Mideast, anywhere from Greece to Afghanistan, right? And has. I mean, the mercenary forces, as well as Azeri regular soldiers, were trained in the occupied section of Cyprus. A lot of these soldiers were used in Libya. They were used in all over the place. So anybody who's, if you're from Greece, if you're from Cyprus, or you're from some other country in the Caucasus or anywhere in the Mideast, you have to be concerned that at any time Erdogan can use this force and the military technology to go after you, and has, right? So this is something that. And plus, a lot of these terrorists and mercenaries are still there in Artsakh. So I don't care whether I'm Iran or I'm Greece or, whoever I am. I have to be concerned, and we have to show these war crimes for what they are. We have to show these atrocities for what they are, and we have to sanction the government of both Turkey and Azerbaijan, as well as the leadership, you know, so that this doesn't continue. And if anybody, even if they don't even care about Armenia, thinks that that this wasn't, I mean, in many ways, I don't want to make an analogy. I'm not like, maybe it's not a good analogy, but in some ways, this was like the Spanish Civil War, where they were testing things in Spain that ultimately led to World War II.
Mhm.
This was Artsakh was being used as a test ground by the Turks to test the United States, to test the Russians. I mean, I'm not happy with this agreement at all. But in my opinion, some people have been talking about how Russia gained so much because now they have a peacekeeping force in Artsakh and they control everything, including South Armenia with the road from Nyachivin. But if I got news for you, if I was Putin, I wouldn't be happy with this result because Turkey has flexed its muscles and they're a threat to Russia too. They're a threat to everybody.
Yeah.
And I cannot exaggerate this. But I mean, I know.
I think that, as far as Turkey's democratic history, I've always said that you can almost set your clock to the number of military coups they have on a regular basis. The most recent one was foiled, but still, like, it is a very, I think its democratic veneer has definitely faded, and its true colors have been shown with some of its actions in the region, as well as what's happened in Armenia, which has been clearly documented by numerous sources. And it's unfortunate and I think appalling to see that an ally of the United States, a so-called ally, behaves in such a way. So it would be great to see him held accountable. I can't remember the last time we had serious talk of sanctions against Turkey. I think it was Senator Alphonse D'Amato from New York, and that goes way back if I'm pulling out Senator D'Amato's name from the history books. But I think that was one of the last times we really talked about serious sanctions against Turkey. But I think it's important. I think we need to talk about these things. We need to put restrictions on their ability to launch military satellites from US soil. And hopefully,
I
I
mean,
know
I'm
your
not
office
saying
is,
that we're going to be,
yes.
and I'm not saying it's going to be easy to get these sanctions in place, but we're certainly going to make the case.
Yeah.
And I think, and I think there's more and more support within the Congress for that. Not to say that we're going to be successful, but we have to try. We have to try.
Now we have a new administration coming in. I want to thank you for talking about. I know how committed you are to this issue, how close it is to your heart, having worked with you and worked in your office. I remember my first day walking into that office. I'd never seen more Armenian rugs anywhere in my entire life, including when I was growing up. It really felt like home, and you were welcoming to the interns in helping us work on these issues. I remember at the time I interned for you was right on the heels of what the Turkish government was trying to do with influencing American academic institutions, universities, by trying to inject funds to use it to push forward its propaganda. So I want to thank you for that. But there is change coming in this country as well. We have a President-elect Biden. He's made a few comments in support of Artsakh and Armenia. What changes do you foresee? I mean, are you concerned about the transition of power from President Trump to President-elect Biden? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, good news last night because the GSA, had this director of the GSA that was like, just doing Trump's dirty work, I guess, and didn't want to authorize the transition process to begin. But she finally did agree to do that. And so I'm sure you noticed that today in the media, they were talking about their transition actually beginning in earnest. And it has, but we still have to monitor it because I think there's going to be still a reluctance on the part of the Trump administration to cooperate with the transition. But at least it's begun. And so that's certainly positive. But I do think the same thing that I said about what the Armenian caucus is trying to do with Pompeo, we also started the process with Biden as well. I do think, and there was making the point through letters and statements and conversations with the new administration that we have to address the status, we have to have a major humanitarian aid package, and we have to make it possible for Armenians to go back to Artsakh, be safe, and that we have to be wary of Turkey and think about sanctions. So we're doing that with the Biden people as well. I think that the difference, I mean, there's so many differences between Biden and Trump. And of course, I'm a Democrat, so I'm very prejudiced. But I mean, look, the bottom line is that Joe Biden is probably more prepared in terms of foreign policy than any American in the 20th century. Maybe you have to go back to Woodrow Wilson, right? And I don't even know if he was so prepared as much as he was good when he was there. But I mean, he was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for so many years. And I think his statements about Artsakh clearly show that he is very supportive of Artsakh and its right to self-determination, and concerned about Turkish and Azerbaijan aggression. So, the one thing you also, I was always worried. I mean, I'll be honest, I was always worried about the fact that Trump and his family had financial ties with Azerbaijan. They had the hotel in Baku, which never opened, but there was a lot of reasons to believe that that President Trump had some major financial ties with Azerbaijan. Although I have to say that when the Armenians approached him at some of those rallies and asked him to intervene and try to do something, that was when Pompeo did start to get involved. But it wasn't ever enough. I mean, we have to be much more involved. What happened in this war and with this agreement was definitely a failure of U.S. foreign policy and the failure of the U.S. to get involved in a major way in the Caucasus. And that's got to be turned around. And we're going to try to make sure that it is under Joe Biden.
Well, thank you for that. Just to wrap up, I have a couple of unrelated to Armenia questions, because for anyone who's watching this who may not be aware, as passionate and committed as you are, Congressman, to Armenia and Artsakh, you happen to be, in whatever spare time or your primary time and role, serve as the chair of the very influential Energy and Commerce Committee in the House. For many years, you were both the ranking member and the chair of the subcommittee that dealt with healthcare issues during the Affordable Care Act discussions. And you spoke very passionately for the rights of Americans to have access to healthcare. So we've seen a surge in COVID cases across the nation now. So how do you think the measures to stop the spread are going to impact communities and businesses? And how can the federal government help cities and counties cope with this impact?
Well, Artie, I have been a big advocate ever since COVID began of having the federal government more involved and having things like a national supply chain commander and a national testing plan, and not leaving this up to each individual state to decide how to handle the situation, and not having the supplies and the protective equipment and everything that comes with having a national effort. And I think that I know that that's going to change under Biden, right? I mean, the problem right now is we're in this interim period where the virus is spreading, and the president has essentially dropped out, right? I mean, Trump has essentially dropped out. And when he was talking about COVID, a lot of times it was very I mean, it was had a negative impact, because he was encouraging people not to wear masks, not to social distance, having rallies where the virus was
A little
spread.
bit dismissive, perhaps, of the threat.
Right. And Biden has made it quite clear that he's, totally of the opposite point of view. So, he has said that on January 20th, he's going to have a national supply commander. He's going to have a national testing plan. And he's been pushing very hard to have another COVID package. Some people call it a stimulus package that would give more money to small businesses, money back to the states because they're in bad shape, help higher unemployment, going back to essentially another CARES package from what we did back in March and April. And that's what needs to be
Yeah.
done. Now, we're trying to do some of these things in the lame duck in December, but unfortunately, I don't know if it's going to be successful. And therefore, we're in this kind of waiting period, which is bad for the spread of the virus until January. If we can do some of these things now, we're going to try in the lame duck. If not,
When will be the last day of the session approximately of this
well,
congressional
the
session?
Congress, ends. The new Congress gets sworn in on January 3rd, but the inauguration of the president is until 30th. So we have that peculiar situation in our country where we have the new Congress and the old president for about 2.5 weeks, which is really crazy. Uh, but I don't think that's going to change. But I mean, the problem is, it's dangerous right now because the president has, President Trump has basically dropped out and is not doing anything about any of this in a significant way.
As a local council member, I can tell you that we are very appreciative for the CARES Act assistance, and we're definitely going to be looking for more of it as we try and prop up our local businesses and our economy.
And
And
hospitals too. I know you're very close with a lot of the hospitals in the Glendale area because you've brought me to some of them, and I'm sure they need more help too, which is also part of the package.
And lastly, before I let you go and wish you a happy and safe Thanksgiving, the Georgia Senate seat, will the Democrats be able to take it?
I think we have a good shot. I mean, the pundits will say that, Georgia's Republican and, how the Democrats going to take these two seats. But most of the pundits didn't believe that Biden would carry Georgia. And, Georgia was one of the few states where we actually gained one seat in the House, took a seat from the Republicans. So I think we have a good chance. I mean, I'm not going to say, I give it at least a 50% chance. I really do.
50 is good enough, I guess. So
Yeah.
besides Georgia, what was the biggest surprise for you in this 2020 November election?
Well, I have to be honest. I wasn't that surprised. I'm not trying to say like I'm some kind of a, expert on it, but I really, I figured that Biden was going to carry those Midwestern states, take them from Trump, Michigan, Wisconsin, um, and that and Pennsylvania, and I thought he had a good shot at Arizona. So I wasn't far. In other words, take all the states that Hillary carried, but then add those. The biggest surprise to me was Georgia, that he won in Georgia. Um, but and then of course I thought it was going to be hard to gain the majority in the Senate and keep it in the House because we were concerned that that in a presidential election, if Trump did fairly well, it would be tough. And it's essentially what happened, right? In other words, Biden won, but it wasn't a huge victory. And we kept the House because he won. We did lose some seats though. And we gained seats in the Senate, and maybe we'll take the other two in Georgia. So I think the one thing that I would say that's really important, I was talking about in the context of Armenia and Artsakh, but I'll also talk about it in the context of our country. We need to be united. Biden is out there saying, I'm not going to be the red state or the blue state president. I'm going to be president for everybody. We've got to get back to that, not only in foreign policy, but in domestic policy as well, because otherwise we erode our strength. Our strength is in our unity, and it's really important for us all to stand together as Democrats and Republicans and whatever you happen to be.
And I've seen firsthand your ability to reach across that aisle, work with your Republican colleagues, especially on Armenian issues, but not just on Armenian issues, on all issues. So, Congressman, I want to thank you for your time. With this time difference between East Coast and West Coast, making time to have this conversation with me. And just to reconnect, it was wonderful talking to you and getting your insight. And we have our work cut out for us, both here in the United States and in Armenia. But I think future looks bright if we're all able to work together. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for all that you do, Artie. You're the best. Take care.
Thank you. Be well. Happy Thanksgiving.
You too.